Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I really do hope you're doing exceedingly well. So much love to each and every one of you, and I'm so glad you're tuning in tonight. I've got the most fabulous story for you that you're really going to love. But before we get settled, don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of cocoa, because I'm sure you need to keep lovely and warm because it's freezing out there. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my name is Heathcliff, but everyone only ever knows me as Heath. I was raised in the French Quarter of downtown Charleston and grew up here as my family genealogy dates back to the French Huguenots that immigrated here in 1680 and initially settled down in the area. I would describe this French Quarter as a small neighbourhood in the southeastern corner of the peninsula. It's known for its cobbled streets, cute little alleyways and old-world charm. You really feel like you're going back in time when you walk down some of those streets here. I love the fact that everything is so centrally located, close to loads of art galleries, great restaurants and quirky cafes, and of course the best pastries that you've ever tasted. But then, this is the French Quarter, so you wouldn't expect anything less. Growing up, my eclectic, very avant-garde mother worked in an art gallery here and was very involved with up-and-coming artists, while my fastidious, hard-working father was involved in the thriving, colourful world of real estate. Ironically, my brother and I never shared our parents' passionate interests in the arts or in real estate. Not that we don't appreciate their intrinsic value, of course. It was just my brother and I were intrepid adventure seekers and outdoor enthusiasts and would spend all our free time camping, hiking and exploring. The story I'm about to share with you happened to my brother and I when we were in our early 20s in about 2008. We were very fortunate and privileged that my father's brother Peter owned his own small hunting estate in West Virginia, which wasn't far away from Charleston. We were always invited to stay up there whenever we fancied some fresh air, exercise and adventure. We could arrive at my uncle's farmhouse unannounced at any time we liked, as there were no formalities with our family. There was always so much to do on my uncle's shooting ranch, even when it was not hunting season. Sometimes we would enjoy a spot of hiking, camping or even fishing in his large lake, so for two rambunctious, over-enthusiastic, assiduous teenagers, the world was our oyster. My uncle's ranch was very beguiling, as he lived in an old-fashioned 1700s colonial farmhouse that epitomised its historic roots, with the typical influences from the time, such as a quintessential brick facade and perfectly aligned windows with a central front door. The idyllic, enchanting farmhouse was surrounded by rich carpets of verdant turf, wooden poled fences, quaint little barns, rolling hills, mountainous valleys, ponds, a creek, a silvery lake, and a vast area of wood green filled with all kinds of indigenous wildlife, including a thriving whitetail population. Over the years, as young boys, my brother and I had observed some inexplicable, freakish things going on in those woods that were an enigma to us and rather nonsensical. On many occasions we would discern rocks piled up on top of each other in bizarre, unnatural piles, with the largest rock at the bottom and the smallest at the top. It seemed both puzzling and perplexing to us, as these curious patterns of rocks were distributed throughout the woods and looked like some internal kind of messaging system, but by who or what we could not even imagine. We would always see young saplings in the forest twisted over deliberately, and then there were broken pieces of timber hanging up high in the treetops, like ominous, inauspicious Christmas decorations done in horizontal crosses, as if to say, "Keep out." It really left you with a real sense of foreboding and impending doom that left us ever so slightly unsettled and discomposed. My brother and I concluded that some kids who'd been watching the Blair Witch Project had decided to terrify all the hunters by displaying all this creepy-looking regalia around the woods. That's what we thought had happened. In hindsight, it might have been something we would have done when we were much younger to creep somebody out. If we'd thought about it, of course, but we never were that imaginative. It would have been a great Halloween trick, come to think about it. Despite these strange, rather peculiar anomalies, Woody and I were both level-headed, pragmatic and circumspect, so we thought nothing more about it. On this occasion we were scouting the woods for our early morning hunt the following day, because the best time to take down a good buck is between 8 and 9 in the morning, as the rest of the day they tend to lay low in the thicket for cover. The deer prefer to venture out early morning and evening, and so these are the best times to hunt. But most hunters report greater successes in the morning, which makes a great deal of sense to me. Despite the fact that my uncle has methodically planted some fixed deer stands on the estate that are accessible to hunters as hideouts, which are intentionally located in strategic points that are close to salt licks, deer feeding stations and water sources, my brother and I have our very own ideas of what actually works for us as aspiring hunters. In my acumen, with practice, intuitiveness, prudence and refinement, you begin to sense what actually works for you on a personal level as a hunter. We also have our own individual idiosyncrasies about what it inevitably takes to advance and sharpen your skills in becoming the quintessential accomplished hunters you are desirous to become, with a great deal of dedication, time and hard work, of course. My brother and I infinitely prefer to hunt from a blind, as when we're head to head after a buck, I find it a whole lot easier getting down to his level to shoot at. The sumptuous wood green on my uncle's land is spread out over a fair distance and separated by mountainous ridges and ravines. I found in the past that the white-tailed deer like to bed on the upper third of the slope against the wind, so they can observe any oncoming danger. I think they like the shelter and security of the walled enclosure of the ridge, and the very fact that it's covered with dense thicket, it's great for hiding in. Judging by the trails of deer scat, it looked like this is exactly what the deer were doing, and I was proved right. My brother and I stood on the opposite ridge that overlooked the mountainous slope, scanning and glassing the whole area through our binoculars, and sure enough, as we had rightly predicted, we could see the bobbing outlines of some hefty-looking whitetail lying low in the high grass on a raised elevation a third of the way up in this densely thick mountainous ravine. My brother and I then followed the freshest scat and the areas where the deer had been eating until we found the perfect place to set up our blinds. This was between some bushy thicket and a couple of trees. We returned to my uncle's home later and spent the rest of the evening enjoying dinner with his family and my two younger cousins, Boris and Brett, who are still only youngsters, about 10 and 9 years of age. My Uncle Peter is a very quirky, eccentric character, and when I mentioned to him that his woods looked like something out of the Blair Witch Project, he laughed and said, "You've got that right, son. It's creepy in those woods." My uncle informed me that he had some hunters refusing to hunt on the land after seeing such strange anomalies displayed around the wood green. They were freaked out, he told me. It sent chills down their spines. "It's possibly just kids having a laugh," I said, "trying to scare everybody." "Exactly my thought," said my uncle. "My kids have their 10-year-old friends to play in the woods all the time. Who knows what that lot get up to in there?" "We don't put up those funny crosses, Daddy," protested Boris. "We don't do things like that." "Well, if your friends didn't do it," reflected my uncle, "it could have been a deliberate act by a poacher trying to scare off other hunters, because I've been having big issues with poachers lately. They access our property by the rear side, so they can't be seen. It's becoming a continuous problem for me." "Well, that would make sense too," I said. "I mean, a poacher deliberately trying to scare off hunters, that could happen." My uncle continued, "One of the hunters was convinced there was a Bigfoot loitering around the place. Believe me, if there was a creature like that around here, I'd be the first to know about it. I've lived on this hunting ranch for 20 long years, and I've never seen anything like that. If my hunting clients had seen anything out of the ordinary, I'm sure they would have told me." "Not necessarily," said Woody. "I've heard that if people see a Bigfoot, they shut up because they're terrified of ridicule." Bigfoot, I reflected. Now that creature isn't real, right? "Of course it's not, son," chuckled my uncle. "It's a bunch of baloney, invented by television producers to increase their ratings because people love mystery, and a subject like Bigfoot is bound to get people talking. It's just fictitious, that's all. But there's no real substance to any of those rumours, I assure you of that." "Exactly right," said Woody. "There are no dead bodies ever found of Bigfoot. No DNA evidence for that matter. It's as legendary as the Loch Ness Monster is in Scotland. I'm sure of that." After a long evening spent with my uncle, full of fun and laughter, we retired to bed early. It was very dark when my brother and I finally rose out of our beds. I've never ever been an early bird, so getting up at the crack of dawn was exceedingly difficult for me. I quickly drank a large mug of coffee, hoping that the caffeine would finally wake me up. Before long, my brother and I made our way to the deer blind and sprayed our camouflage gear down with a spray that we've been using for many years. It's brilliant for eliminating human odours. I then sprinkled the area with some deer corn and placed some peanut butter in strategic points, as in my experience, deers love peanut butter. It was an exquisitely beautiful night. There was a full ivory moon that illuminated the dusky firmament, and there was a twinkling of silvery stars that sparkled from the sky. I could still hear the sounds of crickets and frogs as the rejuvenating cool breeze blew gently against my face. I was beginning to wake up. Before long, my brother and I were seated in our deer stands on two of our very comfortable portable chairs, designed especially for the blind. No expense had been spared in this purchase, as my brother and I believed in the significance of being ultra-comfy in your blind, as the last thing you want is to be uncomfortable, especially if you're waiting for a sizable buck to arrive on the scene. It could render you stiff and tight, which ultimately would affect your shoot. Sometimes the waiting can be very long, monotonous and dreary, and so forbearance and stoicism are very much called into play without question, and a good hunter is an extremely patient man, and I've learnt that the very hard way. In a trice it would seem as if the night folded away as the early shafts of sunlight illuminated the sylvan in a pretty light, and very suddenly the sounds of warbles and twitters permeated across the valley, and a new day was finally born. I could feel my heart twitching and fluttering in excitement, because I was anticipating a very good hunt, and I sensed in my gut that this was going to be a day to remember. Little did I know how right I was, but it would be a day I would never forget, for reasons that would leave me baffled in the years to come. On this particular hunt I was using a Rugger 02 Varminter K1B BBZ, which had proved a winner to me personally. At about 8:30 I could hear the sound of a blue jay making a raucous commotion, which often does mean that deers are coming into the vicinity. All of a sudden I could hear the deer scampering towards the trail of food that we'd laid out very generously. The deer were unusually calm and complacent, and not skittish at all. It was clear they were oblivious to our presence, and standing there in a perfect line of fire was a very sizable bull with an impressive rack, and so I steadied my rifle and aimed at his brains, and he was down like a light, and it was over so fast. I think the other deer couldn't even comprehend what had happened, but they all scattered away like greased lightning. "I've got him," I said to my brother, looking thrilled, and we high-fived each other with delight. "Well done, Heath. That was one hell of a shot," said my brother. "I've never taken a deer down like this before, as this critter died on impact, and that has got to be the most humane kill ever." I waited for a moment, and then to my absolute amazement, walking through the brush towards my deer were two men in camouflage suits with rifles in their hands, and they looked rugged, unkempt, and rough around the edges. I knew at once that they were poachers, and their intentions were not good. "What the hell?" I said to my brother as I watched in horror as this strapping-look, thuggish man began dragging the buck I'd killed along the ground, as if it was his trophy. "What a hell of a cheek! What on earth did he think he was actually doing?" I thought in disgust. I immediately climbed out of my blind and protested. "Excuse me, but that's my deer. What the heck do you think you're doing?" "I think you'll find that it's our deer," he said in a cursory voice. "I've been stalking this deer for days now. It's mine. I've had my eyes on it for a very long time, long before you even got here." "I think you're missing the point," I insisted. "It's my deer. I shot it." "Who gives a damn whether you shot it or not?" said the man. "I told you, it's mine," he growled. I was about to argue when his friend began to point the rifle at us and said, "If you mess with us, you're both dead. Do you understand? And I mean it." "Fine," I said. "You take the deer if it means that much to you. But just stop pointing that rifle at us, will you?" We watched the oafish men leave the area, one dragging the deer along the ground by the antlers and the other guarding the deer by walking backwards with the rifle pointed directly at us. I've never seen anything so pathetic in all my life, as those men were literally holding us up for a deer. It was utterly ridiculous and nonsensical. I felt incensed. Who the hell did they think they were, treating us in such a hostile, despicable manner? Did you see that? I said to my brother. Wait until Uncle Pete hears about this. Those men need to be arrested. And as for stealing our trophy, I've seen everything now. That's crazy. My brother looked exceedingly perturbed. I can't believe they had the bold-faced brass neck to steal our deer like that. And then to actually threaten us like that. It's insane. It's a deer, for goodness sake, not a cargo of gold bullion. Suddenly we heard one of the poachers screaming, "Shoot! Shoot! Go on, shoot!" What the heck are those men doing now? I asked my brother. Woody and I raced towards the noise to see what the commotion was all about. Were these poachers killing another deer? Nothing would surprise me at all. They had no code of ethics whatsoever. They had taken my deer illegally, and they were now poaching another one unlawfully. "It's over there," said one poacher, "in the woods behind the tree. It's a big bear too. We must take him down now. I've always wanted to kill a bear. Now's our chance." "You're crazy," said his friend. "We can't take a bear on with our rifles. Let's get out of here. We've got what we came for." The other man didn't listen and obstinately began firing his rifle towards the dark silhouette of the bear that suddenly came bounding out of the shadows, thundering towards the two men like a rhino in the thicket. And this bear moved with incredible speed, like that of a cheetah, but the ground vibrated and heaved under its massive weight. The two men were so shocked that their fingers were trembling violently, and they began to run away as quickly as they possibly could, but they were no match for the savage bear, who was determined to extract his ultimate revenge, and he was not packing any punches either. He was clearly incensed that one of the poachers had tried to kill him, and he was not about to let them off lightly. Not a chance in heaven. In the twinkling of an eye, the rampaging, ferocious bear lunged towards the poacher, grabbing him ruthlessly by his arms and throttling him on the ground, beating his skull so violently against a rocky outcrop, until finally it broke open like a large ostrich egg, with bits of brain and scalp lying spilt all over the ground, like the most macabre, horrifying scene that you've ever witnessed. I even think Universal Studios would have paid big bucks to film such an explicit, grievous, and most appalling scene. I had never witnessed such a speedy, vicious, barbaric, and savage death before. The other man began to run away as fast as he possibly could, with eyes as round as saucers. I could see that in his terror he had wet his pants. Surprisingly, the pugnacious bear did not actually chase after him, possibly because he had not been one of the shooters, and had singled out the man who had fired at him for the frenzied attack. In revenge, I imagine. I stood there in horror. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was so incapacitated by terrible fear. I was barely able to move a muscle, and I just stood there suspended in a state of incredulous disbelief and repudiation. The critter turned around to face in our direction, and I realised to my horror that this was no bear. It was a humanoid ape, and then it hit me like a bolt of lightning, blasting through my mind with a powerful force. Of course, this was a Bigfoot. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Bigfoot was real. He wasn't a creature of fiction after all. This Bigfoot was bigger than a grizzly bear, and clearly bipedal, with very powerful tree-trunk-sized legs and overlong arms with substantial biceps. It had the most phenomenal-sized shoulders that I've ever seen, with a stomach like a flashboard that was solid muscle. It towered at about 8 feet tall, 600 to 700 pounds, and about 3 foot in width. Its streamlined muscular body was covered in light golden hair, very similar in colour to a grizzly bear, and easily as thick. The creature's dome-shaped head literally merged into its shoulders in a seamless flow, and there was no evidence of a neck to speak of. The hairless grey leathery face was very broad, with a very prominent square jawline and pronounced brow ridge that was deeply furrowed with wrinkles. It possessed the flattest nose that I've ever seen, thin lips and very deep-set eyes. I noticed that he wore a deep scar on the edges of his mouth that curled down towards his upper shoulder, and no hair grew in that region, so it was exceedingly distinguishable, rather like a tattoo. It was a war wound of some kind, I should imagine. The critter kicked the dead corpse very angrily, making some very annoyed grunting sounds. I could tell he was livid that someone had tried to shoot at him. It was an offence to him. Suddenly I let out the most noisy sneeze, or hachoo, and to my horror, the Bigfoot quickly glided over to where my brother and I were standing. I'm not ashamed to admit it, that I began to shake like a jelly, as I've never been so terrified by anything in my entire life. This creature was an apex predator, and my rifle felt like a pathetic water pistol in my hands, or a kid's toy. I was almost certain that my brother and I were dead. The Bigfoot stood there staring at us, and we immediately dropped our rifles to the ground because we knew we were no match for the critter, and we knew that challenging him would make him as mad as hell, and we didn't stand a chance against him. When he looked at us for a moment, I noticed that he had very intelligent, discerning eyes. He was not a stupid creature by any manner of means, and was capable of very deep thought and reflection. The critter looked at me with a rather amused expression on his face, and then he did the weirdest thing you could ever imagine. He tried to imitate my large sneeze, so I made another one. Achoo! He looked at me and imitated my sneeze again and again, and I nodded to encourage him, and he did it again. He copied the sneeze and seemed very pleased with the sound, and he walked away from us practicing the sneeze all the while, and then finally he was gone from our sight, with his brand new noise in tow, I should imagine. We were exceedingly lucky to be able to retrieve our deer that the poachers stole from us. The police were alerted to the dead body of the poacher on my uncle's ranch. My brother and I told our amazed uncle that it was a Bigfoot that had actually killed the poacher. I was to learn that Uncle Peter had actually told the police that it was a bear that had attacked the man. He said that if he'd told them the truth, he doubted they would have believed his story. The police did go searching for the aggressive bear, but they couldn't find him anywhere. I actually heard one officer say to his friend, "That must have been some bear to kill in such a savage way. Bears don't kill like this in my experience." "If indeed it was a bear," said the other officer. My uncle still lives on his shooting ranch to this very day, and the signs are very clear that the Bigfoot is still around. My uncle actually had a chance encounter with him on one occasion a few years ago, when he saw the Bigfoot in the woods on a hunt. He said the creature looked directly at him with large twinkling brown eyes, and although my uncle was absolutely terrified by him because of his intimidating appearance, he sensed almost immediately that the creature wasn't in the least bit hostile and meant him absolutely no harm. I think he encountered the very same Bigfoot that Woody and I discerned, as the critter had that telltale scar around his mouth and upper chest. My uncle believes the poacher was killed because he wanted to kill the Bigfoot. He mistook it for a bear, so he warns everybody about what happened and says, "Don't you ever take on the Bigfoot on my land, nor try to kill it, because it will kill you in a heartbeat if you try to attack it. If you respect him, he will respect you and leave you well alone, as it means you no harm. But if you challenge him, you are almost certainly dead." So there you are. That's my story. Thank you so much for that incredible story. What an incredible encounter. Until next time, goodbye and good night.